In the previous parts, we talked about the birth of the Border Gavaskar Trophy and India's tour to Australia under this new established prize. We saw India go from struggling in the 1999 tour to going toe-to-toe with Australia in 2003. The injustices of the 2007-8 series, especially the Sydney Test, to fall of 2011 and 2014. You can go and watch all of that here in these two videos. During all this, Australia went from unbeatable to vulnerable, and yet, while India happened to find a couple of test wins through these years, a test series win eluded them. Consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and helps us a ton. Thanks. By 2018, when India toured Australia again, the landscape had changed a lot. Since the BGT series in 2014-15, India under Virat Kohli had completely transformed into a formidable test side, especially at home. Well, India were always good at home, but this domination was unprecedented. For example, between 2015 and 2017-18 tour of South Africa, India had won 9 test series on the trot. Despite this unprecedented home domination, India still found it tough winning away, especially in Sena countries. During this period, India's away record stayed poor, whitewashing Sri Lanka, but then losing to South Africa and particularly to England earlier in 2018. The kicker was that the Indian team looked good through these series in patches, but for one reason or another, just couldn't convert those good positions into wins. The 4-1 loss to England was particularly egregious because at least 2 of those 4 lost tests saw India come close and still lose. Virat Kohli's side was hungry to wash away the tag of home track bullies and wanted to win in all conditions. There was another big difference in teams of yesteryears and Virat Kohli's side, namely a consistent 5-bowler attack and the emergence of a pace battery. Ishant Sharma, Bhuvneshwar Kumar, Umesh Yadav, Mohammad Shami were proper seam and swing bowlers who could also bowl at a good pace. 2018 also saw the test debut of one of the India's fastest rising fast bowlers, Jasprit Bumrah. Ravichandran Ashwin and Ravindra Jadeja had become the backbone of Indian spin attack. For the first time in India's history, Indian bowling attack was the stronger part of the team. The batting largely revolved around Virat Kohli, Cheteshwar Pujara and Ajinkya Rahane, as India was still looking for a good overseas opening pair and a more solid middle order batsman. Australia on the other hand were going through a turmoil. Despite winning the 2014-15 BGT at home, this Australian side was far from the dominant Aussie sides of the 90s and 2000s. Between the last Indian tour of their shores and this one, Australia won only 6 out of the 13 test series. They lost to England in England, to India in India, to Sri Lanka in Sri Lanka, to South Africa in South Africa, and to Pakistan in the UAE. But the biggest bombshell fell on them in their tour to South Africa in March of 2018 when Steve Smith, David Warner and Cameron Bancroft were all found guilty of ball tampering in the 3rd test of the series. The incident, famously known as Sandpaper Gate, rocked the Australian cricket as the 3 players found guilty of cheating were all banned. Bancroft was banned for 9 months, while Steve Smith and David Warner were banned for 12 months. The scandal in itself deserves its own video, so do let us know if you want a video on that. But it suffices to say that when the captain and the vice captain of the side are found guilty of something like this, it cannot be good for the team morale. The issue became so serious that the Australian Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, phoned Cricket Australian Board Chairman directly to express his disappointment. Nevertheless, the Aussie side had to select a new captain, and for the time being, the mantle of captaincy was handed to Tim Paine and Josh Hazlewood was selected as his deputy. So when India rocked up to the Aussie shores for the 2018-19 Border Gavaskar Trophy, India went in as the favourites because despite having a settled world-class bowling attack of Mitch Starc, Josh Hazlewood, Pat Cummins and Nathan Lyon, the batting lineup of the Aussies was more vulnerable than ever. India also came to Australia having regained the Border Gavaskar trophy at home, so it was a chance for India to not only retain the trophy but to win a test series in Australia for the first time in forever. The first test at Adelaide was supposed to be a day-night affair, but BCCI did not accept the pink ball fixture. As they said, the Indian players had no real experience with the pink ball and thus were yet not ready to play a pink ball test. This was the first test at the Adelaide Oval since 2014 to be played completely in the day. India won the toss and decided to bat. On a spicy pitch, the decision to bat first backfired. India were reduced to 41 for 4 in the first session itself as the Aussie pacers ripped through the Indian top order. Rohit Sharma then joined Pujara to try and rescue the situation, but India's situation went from bad to worse as both Rohit and Pant got out in the post-lunch session, leaving India 127 for 6. Pujara, however, kept his head down and played around with the lower order. Ashwin combined with Pujara for a dogged 62-run partnership for the 7th wicket. After his dismissal, the rest of the Indian lower order rallied around Pujara. Pujara brought up his 16th Test 100 of 231 balls, showing how important it is to hang around in trying conditions. Maybe modern-day batsmen can learn a lesson or two. The day ended with Pujara running himself out trying to farm the strike, India ending up at 250 for 9. The next day began with the last Indian wicket falling off the first ball of the day, ending the innings at the overnight score. Hazlewood was the pick of the bowlers, picking 3 wickets, with Stark, Cummins and Lyon picking 2 each. The Aussie innings began in a horrible fashion as Aaron Finch was bowled through the gate by Ishant on just his 3rd ball. Marcus Harris and Usman Khwaja had a little partnership, but Australian batting just couldn't cope with Indian pace attack and were reduced to 87 for 4 post-lunch. Despite Travis Head and Hanscom hanging around, the Aussies were reduced to 127 for 6. Head did not give up though and stitched a crucial 50-run partnership with Cummins, guiding Australia to 191 for 7 by the end of the second day. Head continued his resistance on the 3rd day, and by the time he got out, Australia had come close to India's total. The Aussie innings eventually ended at 235, 15 runs short of India's first innings. Bumrah and Ashwin picked 3 wickets each, while Ishant and Shami picked 2 wickets each. The Indian second innings saw a better response from the Indian batsmen, with Pujara once again at the forefront scoring 71, while Rahane scored 70. At one point, India were poised to take a massive lead, having reached 282 for 5, but the lower order failed to capitalize and collapsed to 307, setting a target of 323 for Australia. Nathan Lyon picked 6 wickets, showing that the wicket had enough turn in it for Ashwin to take advantage, and it was not going to be easy for Australia to chase down the score. And it proved to be so. The Aussie chase started poorly as they not only kept losing wickets at regular intervals but also found scoring hard. Only Sean Marsh and Tim Payne presented any resistance in the top order. At 187 for 7, when Payne got out, the match was pretty much over for Australia. But the Indian bowlers' inability to wipe out the tail reared its ugly head as the lower order decided to resist. Cummins, Stark, Lyon and Hazlewood all contributed with the bat, taking the Aussie total as close to the target as possible. But in the end, the Indian bowlers just found enough to break through, ending the Aussie resistance at 291 and winning the test by a slim margin of 31 runs. Bumrah, Shami and Ashwin all picked 3 wickets each. Bumrah bowled an exceptional spell, showing a glimpse of what the future held for him. Ashwin's spell was also special as he bowled a marathon 53 overs in the second innings, conceding only 92 runs. Pujara was named the man of the match for his batting exploits in bowling-friendly conditions. Buoyed by a famous win in Adelaide, expectations were high from the Indian team when they moved to Perth for the second test. It was a special occasion too, as this was the first test to be played at the new Perth Stadium, replacing WACA as the test venue. The wicket was expected to be fast and bouncy just like the WACA and sported a green tinge on the first day. Ashwin's injury meant India decided to go in without a specialist spinner, picking Umesh Yadav instead of Ravindra Jadeja looking at the wicket. Aussies made no changes. Australia won the toss, decided to bat first, and the fast, bouncy, green nature of the pitch did not even come into play as the Aussies got off to a great start. Finch and Harris added 112 for the opening partnership, both reaching their 50s. However, the 112 for no loss soon became an eventful 148 for 4, which included a dropped catch and a superb catch by Kohli to dismiss Peter Hanscom. Sean Marsh and Travis Head, however, continued their good form from the last test, adding a crucial 84 runs for the 5th wicket. Australia, though, ended the day at 277 for 6, with both Marsh and Head back in the pavilion. The next day, Pat Cummins hung around a bit with pain, but the innings eventually folded for 326. Considering the kind of start they had gotten, this was a disappointing total, but nevertheless, it was a total that would come in handy. India might have rued not playing a spinner on a track which was offering uneven bounce to the part-time of Hanuma Vihari, who ended up picking up 2 wickets. The Indian innings got to the most horrendous start imaginable, with both the openers back in the pavilion with the score reading 8. Pujara and Kohli then added some respectability to the score before Pujara perished for 24. At 83 for 3, Rahane joined Kohli. Rahane had made a reputation as a great batsman on Sena pitches, and he did not disappoint again, scoring a patient 50. Day 2 ended with India at 172 for 3 and a chance of getting a first innings lead. Day 3 started in the worst way possible as Rahane got out on the 4th ball of the morning. However, Kohli was determined to not throw it away, and on a green, bouncy, quick pitch of Perth, Kohli brought up his 25th 100, his 6th on the Australian soil. This innings by Kohli is still considered one of the best ever played by an Indian on foreign soil, akin to Sachin at Perth all those years ago. Kohli combined with Hanuma Vihari for a 50-run partnership. However, dismissal of Kohli left Pant way too much to do with the tail. The Indian innings folded for 283, conceding a lead of 43 runs. On a wicket which had some variable bounce, movement, and even something for the spinners, this was a very handy lead. Lyon picked 5 wickets, further raising questions on India's decision of not playing a specialist spinner. Australia's second innings saw Indian pace bowlers bowl with a fiery intent as they hit both Marcus Harris and Aaron Finch on the body multiple times. Finch even had to retire hurt when a Shami delivery awkwardly bounced on him and caught his fingers. Outside of Usman Khawaja, none of the top order batsmen made many runs. At 120 for 4, India had a chance of shutting down Australia early, but Payne and Khawaja lifted them out of the doldrums. The Aussie second innings ended at 243, setting a tricky 287 as the target. Shami and Bumrah proved to be lethal, Shami picking 6 wickets while Bumrah 3. On the other hand, Umesh Yadav finished the match with only 2 wickets, further raising questions on the decision to go in without a frontline spinner. Well, the target proved to be too much for India as they folded for just 140 in the second innings, handing Australia a 146-run win. Rahane, Vihari and Pant did get starts, but no Indian batsman went beyond 30. The 4 frontline Aussie bowlers all were amongst the wickets, with Stark and Lyon picking 3 each, while Hazelwood and Cummins 2. Lyon was named the man of the match for his 8 wickets in the match. Australia had come roaring back into the Test series. The action moved to Melbourne for the Boxing Day Test. India had learned their lesson and picked a specialist spinner this time, though due to an injury to Ashwin, it was Jadeja. KL Rahul and Murli Vijay too lost their places in the side, with Hanuma Vihari promoted to open and Mayank Agarwal making his Test debut. Australia went in with an unchanged side yet again. The Melbourne pitch was under scrutiny as in recent years it had become a docile, easy pitch to bat on, and a lot of grass was left on the track to counter it. Despite that, Kohli won the toss and chose to bat, and he was vindicated as outside of Pat Cummins, no bowler felt like picking wickets on day 1. Mind you, the wicket wasn't easy to bat with some inconsistent bounce, but Indian batsmen were determined to not throw it away. Even the low score of Hanuma Vihari was important as he consumed 66 balls and blunted the new ball before getting out for 8. Mayank Agarwal made a great first impression on his debut, scoring 76 and stitching a valuable second wicket partnership with Pujara. The first day proved to be a slow-moving, albeit one heavily in favour of India, as India ended the day at 215 for 2. Day 2 saw all of Indian batting lineup come to the party. Pujara brought up his 17th Test 100, his second on this tour. Kohli and Rohit Sharma notched up their respective 50s, while Rahane and Pant made useful contributions. The scoring remained slow, and India eventually declared at 443 for 7 towards the end of the second day. India held the advantage going into the third day, but what happened next was something really special. The third day saw Jasprit Bumrah, playing only his 9th Test match, rip through the Aussie batting lineup. Throughout this year, Bumrah was showing that he had the potential to become the spearhead of India's Test bowling attack. His unique action and ability to pick wickets in almost any condition were already talk of the town. But this bowling performance underscored what everyone was so excited about. Bumrah picked wickets with all sorts of deliveries. Bouncers, Yorkers, full length, but the one that was the most special one was the wicket of Shaun Marsh just before lunch. A slower Yorker completely bamboozled Marsh, who was caught leg before. The look of disbelief on his face underlined how good Bumrah's ball was. Bumrah ended up with 6 wickets and Australia were bundled out for just 151, handing India a huge lead of 292 runs. India chose against enforcing the follow-on, batting again. The Indian second innings was just an exercise in piling on the misery on the Aussies, though the Aussie bowlers didn't let India off the hook easily. Mayank Agarwal and Pant were the only warriors in what proved to be a very short innings. India declared their second innings on day 4 at 106 for 8. Cummins picked 6 wickets, making it 9 for him in the match, but it was of little consolation as the Aussies were set an improbable target of 399. Australia's second innings was better than their first, but not by much. They kept losing wickets throughout the day at regular intervals, and when Tim Paine got out, leaving Australia at 176 for 7, the match was pretty much over. However, Cummins decided not to throw in the towel, scoring a fighting 50 as Australia ended the day at 258 for 8. 141 runs adrift of the target, but still somehow alive in the match. For India though, it was the weather more than anything that was the concern. The 5th day saw the first session washed out due to rain. The Indian fans held their breath with anxiety. Was the failure to wrap up the Aussie innings on the 4th day going to cost India the Test match? Well, no. The play did finally begin, and all it took for India was 27 deliveries. Australia were bowled out for 261, handing India the Test match by a margin of 137 runs. India had taken an unassailable 2-1 lead with this. Not only that, India finally managed to retain the Border Gavaskar Trophy on the Australian soil and had now taken a step closer to an unprecedented Test series win in Australia. Bumrah was named the man of the match for his 9 wickets in the Test. So when everyone moved to Sydney, India had the golden opportunity to create history. They were this close to winning a Test series on the Australian soil for the first time ever. Ashwin was still injured, meaning Jadeja remained in the squad, but India took a bold call on their bowling composition, including Kuldeep Yadav in place of an injured Ishant Sharma instead of going with a fast bowler like Umesh Yadav. Thus far, India's 3-pronged pace attack was doing great, but it being Sydney may have convinced India to go in with 2 spinners. KL Rahul was back in place of Rohit Sharma, who had returned home to attend to his wife and newborn daughter. For the Aussies, Aaron Finch was replaced by Marnus Labuschagne, who had made his Test debut just a couple months ago. India won the toss and decided to bat on a seemingly benign Sydney track. Rahul got out early, but Mayank Agarwal continued his good form, bringing up his second 50 in 3 innings and stitched a 116-run partnership with Pujara. Kohli and Rahane got starts but couldn't go on to make a big one. On the other hand, Pujara cashed in on his rich vein of form, bringing up his 18th Test century his third of the series. India ended the first day at 303 for 4, firmly in the driver's seat. The second day saw Hanuma Vihari fail to convert his promising start into a big score when he got out for 42, but that brought Rishabh Pant to the crease. Pant and Pujara added 89 runs for the 6th wicket before Pujara finally perished, just 7 short of what could have been his 4th double 100. After Pujara's dismissal, the Aussie bowlers must have thought, how bad could it really get? Well, it got bad for them. Very bad for them. Pant thus far had a quiet series with the bat and had only shown glimpses of his potential. Well, Pant went full punt on Aussies. He brought up his second Test 100 in an emphatic fashion. He went from 50 of 85 balls to 100 of 137 balls, meaning his next 50 came off just 52 balls. Jadeja provided ample support and brought up his own 50. By the time Jadeja finally got out, they had combined for a 204-run partnership. Jadeja got out for 81, and with that, India declared the innings at a whopping 622 for 7. Pant remained unbeaten at 159 of just 189 deliveries, an exhilarating display of stroke making. The Aussie bowlers were all taking to the cleaners, all their frontline bowlers conceding over 100 runs. Lyon picked up 4 wickets but ended up conceding 178 runs in the process. Australia ended the second day at 24 for no loss, still 598 runs behind India and staring at a very possible first ever home Test series defeat to India. The wicket was still good to bat on though, and the Aussie top 3 proved as much. Marcus Harris brought up his second 50 of the series and looked like for once the fragile Aussie batting would fight. However, the Aussie middle order collapsed and the 128 for 1 soon became 198 for 6. By the time bad light and rain stopped the play on day 3, Australia were 236 for 6, still 386 runs adrift of India. Only a miracle could now save them. Well, miracle did happen as rain and bad light allowed very little play on day 4 and 5. The Aussies ended their first innings at 300 as the tail wagged for a bit. Kuldeep Yadav vindicated his selection as he ended up with a fifer. Australia were asked to follow on, still 322 runs behind, but the weather allowed almost no play on day 5, and when the match ended, Australia were 6 for no loss in their second innings. So we can say the weather saved Australia from losing another Test match. But what the weather couldn't do was save the series for Australia. India had done it. With the draw in Sydney, India had finally broken their duck, winning their first ever Test series on Australian soil. The scoreline could have easily read 3-1 if the Sydney Test did not get washed out, but it was still a massive achievement for the Indians. Cheteshwar Pujara was rightly named the man of the match and man of the series, scoring 521 runs at an average of 74.42 with 300s. It was a special series for him because he was the highest scorer by some distance. The second highest being Rishabh Pant, who scored 350 runs, with almost 40% of his runs came in one single innings. By his standards, Virat Kohli had a quieter series, scoring 282 runs with 100 at an average of 40.28. The stats show how much more bowler friendly this series was compared to the last few Border Gavaskar series on the Australian soil. It perfectly reflected in the Aussie batting performances where no one registered even a single 100. Marcus Harris was their top scorer with 258 runs at an average of 36.85, underlining the fact that the Aussies really missed Steve Smith and David Warner, easily their 2 best batsmen, but also showed how shallow the talent pool seemed for Australia, something very hard to imagine even 5 years ago. Well, the bowling stood out on both sides. Jasprit Bumrah and Nathan Lyon were the top wicket takers for their respective sides, picking 21 each, but where Bumrah's wicket came at an average of just 17, Lyon averaged over 30, showing the disparity between the two sides. In fact, maybe for the first time in history, Indian fast bowlers outbowled the Aussie fast bowlers in their own backyard, with Bumrah, Shami and Ishant all recording better averages and strike rates than Cummins, Hazelwood and Stark. India were better than Australia in every department. Virat Kohli's aggressive captaincy also drew praise, even though the Aussie media tried to paint him as a villain because of his feisty nature. Nevertheless, this was a new version of India Australia got to see on their shores, a team that took no prisoners and were unapologetic in their approach. Between 2019 and the next Border Gavaskar Trophy in 2020, the whole world changed. If you went on a long slumber after the 2019 Border Gavaskar Trophy and only woke back up for the next Border Gavaskar Trophy in the late 2020, you would think, what the hell happened? How come India and Australia played only a few test series in close to 2 years? Well, because a global pandemic happened and swept the world. Needless to say, it had its effect on cricket too. For the purpose of record, India and Australia both played 4 test series each during this period. After the last BGT, India went on a rampage, winning 3 consecutive series against West Indies away and against South Africa and Bangladesh at home. Not only did they win those, but they whitewashed all 3 sides 2-0, 3-0 and 2-0 respectively. However, India lost the series in New Zealand, getting clean swept themselves. On the heels of losing to India, Australia swept Sri Lanka at home 2-0, drew the Ashes away in England 2-all, and then swept Pakistan and New Zealand 2-0 and 3-0 respectively. The Border Gavaskar Trophy in 2020 was the first test series of the 2021 season for both the teams. It was also the second consecutive BGT series happening in Australia instead of the usual cycle of alternating between India and Australia. With the worldwide pandemic still raging, the series happened in a very unique situation with social distancing, quarantine and team bubbles being a thing. The pandemic forced schedule to be reshuffled, like the limited overs games being moved ahead of the test matches. During the time, most cricket was happening behind closed doors, but the crowds were allowed for India's tour to Australia in limited capacity. Crowd capacities for India's visit to Australia ranged from 75% at the Gabba, where the final test was to be played, to 25% at the MCG for the Boxing Day test. Sydney had an outbreak in late December, prompting restrictions in New South Wales. Cricket Australia considered swapping the traditional New Year test from Sydney with Brisbane, but eventually the matches went ahead as planned, with Sydney's capacity reduced from 50% to 25%. The team captains were the same as the last tour, Virat Kohli for India and Tim Paine for Australia. The first test at the Adelaide Oval was India's first pink ball test on the Australian soil. This was India's only second day-night test, while Australia had already been playing pink ball test matches for quite some time, this being their 8th in 6 years. India won the toss, decided to bat and got off to the worst start imaginable, losing Prithvi Shaw of the second ball of the test. Mayank Agarwal too did not last long, as India were reduced to 32 for 2. The hero of the last BGT series in Australia, Pujara, was then joined by the Indian skipper Virat Kohli. They added 68 runs for the third wicket, but the scoring remained slow, particularly from Pujara, who eventually got out for a painstaking 43 of 160 balls. Rahane and Kohli then continued the good work that Pujara and Kohli had put in as they picked up the scoring rate. At 188 for 3, it felt like India were in the driving seat, but a mix-up led to Virat Kohli's run out for 74, which triggered a mini collapse as India finished the day at 233 for 6, squandering the advantage they had gained throughout the day. The second day began in even worse way possible, as the last 4 Indian wickets were wrapped up for only 11 runs. India being bowled out for 244, meaning the last 7 Indian wickets had fallen for just 56 runs. Maybe foreshadowing for what was about to happen later in the test. Mitchell Starc led the Aussie bowling with a 4-for, while Pat Cummins picked 3. Hazelwood and Lyon picked a wicket each. The Aussie innings didn't fare much better, as the Indian bowlers ripped through the Aussie batting lineup. In the absence of David Warner, who was injured, Matthew Wade and Joe Burns opened the batting and were both back in the pavilion with the score reading 29. Australia kept losing wickets at regular intervals and at one point were reeling at 111 for 7. But as it happened so regularly with Indian bowlers, they struggled to wipe out the tail. Tim Paine played a captain's knock as the tail rallied around him. Australia were eventually bowled out for 191, conceding a lead of 53 runs. Paine top scored with an unbeaten 73. Ashwin proved to be a handful, picking up 4 wickets. Umesh Yadav picked 3 and Bumrah 2. India ended the day at an eventful 9 for 1 that saw Mayank Agarwal dropped, while Shaw yet again got out cheaply, bowled through the gate once again. Despite the early wicket, one could say India was slightly ahead in the game, as a 53-run lead in a low-scoring game could prove to be very handy. Little did anybody know what was in store on day 3. When Mayank Agarwal and night watchman Jasprit Bumrah trudged onto the pitch on day 3, the test was poised, delicately balanced with India 62 runs ahead with 9 wickets in hands. Cricket pundits and fans alike would have been thinking about what sort of target India would set or what sort of score would be enough. They say cricket is a game of great uncertainties. Nobody could have imagined the horror show it would turn into for India. That score of 15 may still be haunting India, as the dismissal of Bumrah triggered what can only be called an utter disintegration of India's batting order. 15 for 1 soon became 15 for 5 when Bumrah, Pujara, Agarwal and Rahane all fell in quick succession. 4 runs later fell Virat Kohli, making it 19 for 6. Then as India crawled to 26, Saha and Ashwin fell, making it 26 for 8. 5 runs later, Hanuma Vihari fell as everyone around the world looked at the score with disbelief. 31 for 9. And as if things couldn't get any worse for India, the last wicket did not even fall. Shami got hit on the arm and could no longer bat, meaning India's innings folded for 36. Yes, you heard it right. 36. This was India's lowest score in Test cricket ever, beating their previous lowest total of 42 that they had recorded against England at Lord's way back in 1974. Not only that, this was the joint 4th lowest total in the history of Test cricket and the lowest Test total in the last 65.5 years. It was an utter destruction and humiliation for India. Hazelwood and Cummins ran through India's batting, picking 5 and 4 wickets respectively. The biggest surprise was Stark ending wicketless. Indians were shell-shocked, but things only got worse because it was revealed that Shami was unable to bowl due to the blow sustained to his arm, and thus India were now going to defend that paltry lead of 90 runs without any of their premier fast bowlers. The test that was delicately poised at the beginning of the day turned into a mere formality as Australia knocked off the target in just 21 overs. For the record, Wade and Labuschagne did get out, but it was only of academic interest. The ending to the test was fitting, as Burns, needing 5 to reach his 50 but Australia needing only 3 runs, hit an aerial pull towards the fine leg boundary only for Vihari to drop the catch and the ball went for 6. Australia won the test by 8 wickets in just 2.5 days, taking a 1-0 lead in the series. It was an utter humiliating defeat for the Indian team. Tim Paine was named the man of the match for his captain's knock in the first innings and 7 dismissals. In hindsight, it may seem like the award belonged to a bowler, but Paine's inning was really important because had India secured a bigger lead at the time, who knows how the third day would have turned out. Nevertheless, questions swirled around the Indian team coming out of the Adelaide Test. This was the kind of defeat that usually breaks the spirit within the dressing room and mentally scars the players. India had been here before, in this exact situation, where one bad performance, one bad innings would cascade into a series whitewash. Quite a few pundits were already predicting a 4-0 whitewash in favour of Australia. The noise around the Indian dressing room was deafening. Through all this noise, India needed to remember that it was literally just one bad innings because they were in the ascendancy before it all went up in flames. They needed to believe that they could bounce back, but the hits just kept coming. Soon it was discovered that Mohammad Shami had broken his arm and was ruled out of the rest of the series. Before the series, Virat Kohli was already granted paternity leave, which meant he returned home after the first test, meaning India were going to play the rest of the series without their talismanic leader. Vice captain Ajinkya Rahane took over the captaincy for the rest of the series. Selection conundrums plagued the Indian think tank because not only were Kohli and Shami going to miss the rest of the series, they had to take a call on two other important positions. One, Prithvi Shaw, whose technique felt inadequate for batting in these conditions, meaning India needed a new opener. Two, the wicket-keeping duties. Pant had proven himself in foreign conditions with the bat, meaning Riddhiman Saha's place in the side wasn't guaranteed even if he was a superior wicket-keeper. In fact, people were perplexed that Saha was even selected for the first test ahead of Pant. Australia were much the happier side, but they also had an issue on their hand, namely the unavailability of David Warner and Will Pucovski for the second test. The second test at the MCG saw India hand debuts to Shubman Gill, who replaced Prithvi Shaw, and Mohammad Siraj, who replaced Shami. Rishabh Pant took place of Saha in the playing 11. India also took the bold decision of playing Jadeja over KL Rahul to replace Kohli in the playing 11, meaning India went in with 5 specialist bowlers. Australia named an unchanged side. Australia won the toss, decided to bat, and regretted it as Indian bowlers took advantage of the fragile Aussie top order. Joe Burns went for a 10-ball duck while Wade and Steve Smith fell to Ashwin, the latter for a duck. The Aussie score read 38 for 3 when Travis Head joined Labuschagne at the crease. The duo put on 84 before Head edged one to Rahane of Bumrah. Labuschagne, who had been very patient so far, followed soon after, falling 2 runs short of a well-deserved 50, falling into the leg side trap specifically set up for him, becoming Mohammad Siraj's first ever test victim. Tim Paine then survived a couple of close calls, an LBW shout of Siraj's bowling and then a run-out call. The run-out was a matter of special interest as the bat seemed on the crease from one angle while the other showed it to be just over. Many reckoned he should have been out, but the third umpire decided otherwise. Nevertheless, the Aussie middle and lower order collapsed from 124 for 3 to 164 for 8, and only a late cameo from Nathan Lyon allowed them to reach 195. Jasprit Bumrah was the pick of the bowlers, taking 4 wickets while Ashwin picked 3. Siraj too had a decent debut, picking 2 important middle order wickets. Once again, the Indian bowlers had done the job, and it was up to the Indian batsmen to back it up. The first day ended with India having reached their lowest test score ever, but at the loss of only 1 wicket. The second day saw India lose wickets at a regular interval. Gill and Pujara added 61 runs for the second wicket, but both got out in quick succession. Vihari and Pant too got start, but neither could capitalize as India at one stage were 173 for 5, still 22 runs behind when Jadeja joined Rahane, the stand-in captain. India were technically playing with a batsman less, meaning India really needed Jadeja to stay with Rahane and build some sort of partnership. Jadeja vindicated his inclusion as Rahane and Jadeja batted beautifully. Rahane got dropped by Smith when he was on 73 and made full use of the life. Rahane brought up his 12th Test 100 under testing conditions and together with Jadeja bailed India out of a precarious situation, ending day 2 at 277 for 5, 82 runs ahead. Before the end of the day's play, Rahane was dropped again, this time by Head. Bad weather ended the day early. Day 3 saw Rahane and Jadeja build on their good work from last night, but it ended in a disaster when Rahane got run out attempting a quick single to bring up Jadeja's 50. Jadeja did eventually bring up his 50, but the Indian tail did not wag, meaning India went from 294 for 5 to all out for 326, losing the last 5 wickets for just 32 runs. Despite the late order collapse, India held the advantage with a 131-run lead. Mitchell Starc and Nathan Lyon took 3 wickets each while Cummins picked 2. For Australia to come back in the match, they needed good performances from their batsmen who thus far had looked shaky. Umesh Yadav struck early for India, getting Joe Burns for just 4, his second failure of the match, but then went down with a muscle strain, bowling only 3.5 overs. Despite India being a bowler short, the rest of the bowlers made up for it for some inspired bowling. the Aussie middle order collapsed as Australia went from 98 for 3 at one point to 99 for 6. Tim Paine's dismissal was particularly controversial. He was adjudged not out on the field, but was given out on review when the snicker showed a spike at the time of the ball passing the bat. However, the hotspot did not show anything. Paine called for more consistency in DRS, pointing to the fact that Pujara had a similar case of snicker showing an edge but hotspot showing nothing, and at that time, the third umpire ruled it inconclusive, staying with the on-field not out decision. Australia somehow crawled to the end of day 3, ending it at 133 for 6, 2 runs ahead of India. Day 4 saw the Aussie tail wag, adding 67 runs to the overnight score, eventually the innings ending at 200. But it was too little too late, as India was set a target of just 70. All the Indian bowlers contributed, with the debutant Siraj ending with 3 wickets, while Bumrah, Ashwin and Jadeja picked 2 each. The Indian innings started in a horrible fashion when Agarwal and Pujara got out early, the score reading 19 for 2. The wounds from Adelaide were still fresh, and the Indian fans must have had their hearts in their mouths. But Gill and Rahane prevented any further hiccups, achieving the target in just under 16 overs. Gill had a great debut. He looked assured at the crease and pounced on anything loose. Rahane was rightfully named the man of the match for his heroic innings and great captaincy in absence of Kohli. The win was all the more sweet because of the circumstances under which it was achieved, bouncing back from the ignominy of being bowled out for 36. The series was now wide open, with both teams locked at 1-1. With the epic comeback in Melbourne, things for India should have looked only up and up, but it was not. Umesh Yadav, who had replaced an injured Shami, sustained a calf injury himself, ruling him out of the last 2 test matches. KL Rahul also sustained an injury, spraining his left wrist, meaning he was out of the tour too. Navdeep Saini was set to make his test debut to replace the injured Yadav. Mayank Agarwal's poor form meant he was also replaced at the top of the order by a returning Rohit Sharma. Injuries were not the only problems plaguing India. 5 Indian players, Rohit Sharma, Rishabh Pant, Shubman Gill, Navdeep Saini and Prithvi Shaw, were put in isolation after a video surfaced of them sitting inside a restaurant, and thus they were accused of breaching the bio-bubble protocols. Both Cricket Australia and BCCI sprung into action and launched an investigation. BCCI rubbished the reports from Australia, one official even going as far as to say that the Australian media, quote-unquote, at times acts as an extension of their cricket team. Eventually, all 5 players were available for selection at Sydney. For Australia, there was some good news. David Warner was fit again, while the young prospect Will Pucovski had recovered too, meaning the Aussies were going to have a new opening pair while Joe Burns and Travis Head dropped out of the team. The traditional New Year test began at the SCG, where Australia won the toss and decided to bat. Warner's return to the team wasn't a triumphant one, as he fell early to Siraj. However, the debutant Pucovski and Labuschagne added 100 runs for the second wicket. Pucovski rode his luck, having been dropped twice and scored a 50 on debut before eventually perishing for 62. This brought Steve Smith to the crease. Australia's best batsman by some distance this series, Smith had really struggled for form, having scored a grand total of 9 runs before this innings. He was determined to make it right. The rain-truncated day saw 35 overs lost to the weather as Australia ended the first day at 166 for 2. Labuschagne brought up his 50, ending the day on 67, while Smith was looking more and more assured at 31. Day 2 saw more rain delays, but it also saw Smith play a scintillating innings. Australia was sitting pretty at 206 for 2 when Labuschagne fell 9 runs short of his 100. This triggered a middle order collapse and wickets tumbled from the other end, while Smith, increasingly assured, played his way back into form. He kept losing partners on the other end, but it did not deter Smith from bringing up his 27th Test 100. Smith was the last man out for 131, having guided Australia to 338. The way the Aussie innings had begun, they would have hoped for way more, but it was still a competitive total. For India, Jadeja picked 4 wickets while Bumrah and Saini picked 2 each. India began their innings well with the opening pair of Sharma and Gill putting on 70. Sharma got out for a handy 26. Gill brought up his first Test 50 but got out shortly after. India ended the day at 96 for 2, still 242 runs behind. The third day saw Indian wickets fall at regular intervals. Pujara scored a painstaking 50 of 176 deliveries, but no other batsman even crossed 40 as the Indian first innings was wrapped up by Australia for 244, 94 runs short of the Aussie total. Pat Cummins bowled an outstanding spell, picking 4 wickets for just 29 runs off just over 21 overs. Hazelwood took 2 wickets while 3 batsmen fell to run-outs. India's woes did not end here. Jadeja copped a blow to his left thumb from Mitchell Starc, rendering him unable to bowl in the Australia's second innings, and his absence was felt as the Aussies made hay on what was now an easy track to bat on. Warner and Pukowski got out early, but Labuschagne, Smith and Green all crossed 50s, scoring 73, 81 and 84 respectively. For the first time in the series, a team was able to declare their innings when Australia declared for 312 for 6 on the 4th day, setting an improbable target of 407 for India of close to 4 sessions. If this wasn't enough, on the 3rd day, Indian players, especially Mohammad Siraj and Jasprit Bumrah, complained of racist abuse and foul language directed at them from sections of the crowd. The issue escalated on the 4th day when Siraj was target of more racial abuse and was allegedly called a brown dog and big monkey in a series of racist slurs hurled by a group of Australian spectators. Police had to intervene and remove some of the spectators on his complaint. India made a formal complaint after play on day 3 of the match. Indian captain Ajinkya Rahane said after the match that it was quote-unquote not acceptable at all and it should not happen anywhere in the world. While veteran Ravichandran Ashwin claimed he had been the victim of abuse from Sydney crowd for almost a decade. It felt like the universe was conspiring against India, but they were not yet ready to throw in the towel. Gill and Rohit started well, adding 71 for the first wicket again, but disaster struck as both batsmen were back in the pavilion before the end of the day's play. Gill scored 31 while Rohit Sharma notched up a 50. India ended the day at 98 for 2, needing 309 on the final day with 8 wickets in hand. We had a game on our hands. The final day saw Rahane get out early, making the score 102 for 3. Pujara was joined by Pant and suddenly the complexion of the game changed entirely. While Pujara was playing his usual conservative self, Pant went after the bowlers. Both the Indian batsmen brought up their 50s. By lunch, the Indian score read 206 for 3. Now, just 202 runs away from the target. Pant decided to up the ante even more and in the process perished just 3 runs short of what would have been a magnificent 100. Pujara's vigil at the crease also came to an end just before tea for 77. Jadeja wasn't fit to bat but was still padded up if the need arose. But it was clear that Vihari and Ashwin had to bat like their life depended on it. As if things couldn't get any worse, Vihari and Ashwin both were injured and had to bat despite being in immense pain. Vihari sustained a hamstring injury, meaning he couldn't even run, while Ashwin woke up in the morning with a tweak in the back. Despite both batsmen being visibly in immense pain, they batted through the final session to take India to a draw. The Aussie bowlers kept toiling away in the Sydney heat, but it all went in vain. Vihari and Ashwin's innings were testament to their courage. Vihari ended up with an unbeaten 23 of 161 balls, while Ashwin made an unbeaten 39 of 128 balls. The marathon innings played by both caused a lot of frustration to the Aussies, so much so that Tim Payne was caught sledging on the stump mic.
Talk all day, man. Wait till you get to the Gabbatoir, pal.
Well, he had the case of being frustrated as he contributed to India escaping with a draw as he dropped as many as 3 catches. Tim Paine later said, "I pride myself on my keeping and haven't had too many worse days than that today." He later apologized for his behavior too, saying, "My leadership wasn't good enough." India ended the second innings at 334 for 5. And who knows, if Vihari and Ashwin were fit enough and Jadeja could bat, maybe India could have even tried for a win. Nevertheless, India escaped with a draw and the series remained level at 1-1. Rahane called the SCG draw as good as a win, and who could blame him considering the situation? So the two teams were ready to march on to Brisbane, still locked in level, still everything to play for. India had spectacularly come back from the Adelaide debacle, winning the Melbourne Test and heroically drawing the Sydney Test. And yet, the population in the infirmary for India was ever growing. Jadeja, who broke his thumb in Sydney, was ruled out of the final test. So were Hanuma Vihari and Ravichandran Ashwin, who were also injured in Sydney. If this wasn't enough, it was revealed that India's most important fast bowler, Jasprit Bumrah, had sustained a side strain, which could even be a tear, which meant Bumrah was also ruled out of the Brisbane Test. So if you're keeping count, in the space of 3 tests, India had lost Mohammad Shami, Umesh Yadav, Ravindra Jadeja, Ravichandran Ashwin and Jasprit Bumrah. Include Ishant Sharma, who was ruled out of the entire test series before the series even began, India's whole front-line bowling lineup was out. If all of this wasn't enough, there was uncertainty surrounding the Brisbane Test itself due to the UK virus strain being detected. Eventually, BCCI gave the go-ahead when no community transmission was detected. For Australia, the unlucky Will Pucovski, who already had to miss the first 2 tests due to concussion, was injured again and was replaced by Marcus Harris. So when India rocked up to Brisbane, they had a bowling lineup that consisted of Mohammad Siraj, who was playing his 3rd test, Navdeep Saini and Shardul Thakur, who were playing the 2nd test, and T. Natarajan and Washington Sundar, who were making their debuts. All in all, India were going into the Brisbane Test match with a bowling lineup that had a grand total of 4 test match worth of experience. Not to mention, this was Gabba, a ground where Australia hadn't lost a test match since 1988. It was the fortress. It was called the Gabbatoir for this very reason. It felt like all Australia had to do to win the test and regain the Border Gavaskar trophy was to turn up to the venue. Australia won the toss and elected to bat first. Despite the inexperience, the Indian bowlers struck early, sending David Warner and Marcus Harris back with the score reading 17 for 2. After this, Labuschagne decided to buckle down, building useful partnership first with Steve Smith and then with Matthew Wade. In the process, Labuschagne brought up his 5th Test century, his first of the series. He finally scored his much-deserved century in this series. Australia ended the first day at 274 for 5. As if India's injury crisis couldn't get any worse, Navdeep Saini left the field with a groin injury, further depleting India's bowling attack. Even then, the Indian bowlers did relatively well against the Aussies on the 2nd day. The Aussie middle and lower order did well. Everyone got a start and Tim Paine even got a 50. But nobody could really score big as the Australian innings folded for 369. Shardul Thakur, T. Natarajan and Washington Sundar took 3 wickets each. In reply, the Indian top order all got start except Shubman Gill. Yet, no one really went on to score anything significant enough. Despite all the starts and scores of 40s and 30s, India were reeling at 186 for 6 on the 3rd day, still 183 runs behind with only the inexperienced tail left to bat. What happened next may well have caused the destiny to change its course. What followed was one of the most adventurous partnerships between 2 players who were not even supposed to play in this series at all. Washington Sundar on debut and Shardul Thakur playing his 2nd test combined for a fantastic 123-run partnership that knocked the stuffing out of the Aussie attack. Their partnership made sure India got as close to the Aussie total as possible. Both Shardul and Washington scored 50s. The innings finally ended at 336, just 33 runs behind Australia's total. For Australia, Josh Hazlewood was the pick of the bowlers taking a fifer. Stark and Cummins picked 2 wickets each. If day 3 belonged to Shardul and Washington, day 4 belonged to Mohammad Siraj. Warner and Harris got off to a great start, adding 89 for the opening partnership. 89 for no loss soon became 123 for 4 as the Aussie top order hobbled along due to some good bowling by the Indians. Steve Smith's half-century and valuable contributions from Cam Green, Tim Payne and Pat Cummins meant that Australia posted a challenging total. The second innings finishing at 294, setting India a target of 328 runs with possible 114 overs to be bowled. Mohammad Siraj picked up his first Test fifer and dedicated his haul to his late father who had passed away not long ago. He was supported well by Shardul Thakur, who picked 4. A fourth innings target of 300 plus at the Gabba? It had never been done before. In fact, a 300 plus target had only been successfully chased twice by a visiting team in Australia. So if India were to do it, they had to create history. The day 4 finished early due to the weather when India were 4 for no loss, meaning India needed 324 runs on the final day of the possible 98 overs. The game was tantalizingly poised. Day 5 saw India lose Rohit Sharma early, edging one behind. Shubman Gill and Pujara then buckled down to make sure India did not face any more setbacks in the morning, guiding India to 83 for 1 at lunch. Gill was showing his potential as the future of Indian opening position, notching up his second 50 of the series. Post-lunch, Gill upped the scoring rate while Pujara buckled down in his usual style. Gill was enterprising in his stroke making but fell 9 short of a well-deserved 100. Rahane came in and showed intent to not draw but win the game, scoring a quick-fire 24. When he got out, India were 167 for 3, still needing 161 runs from a possible 43 odd overs. Pant joined Pujara, who was determined not to throw it away, copying many blows all over his body. India went into tea at 183 for 3, requiring 145 runs of the possible 37 overs in the final session. After tea, while Pant started scoring a bit more freely, Pujara brought up one of the most dogged 50 he may have ever scored in his life. The second new ball got rid of Pujara, who had scored 56 of 211 balls. The score read 228 for 4. India needed another 100 runs from around 20 overs. Now in situations like these, most teams and batsmen would opt for a safe draw. But Pant had other ideas. Instead of buckling down, he decided to up the scoring rate. However, Mayank Agarwal failed to provide support, getting out for 9, the score reading 265 for 5. Still 63 runs away with around 13 overs to go. The wicket was showing signs of wear and tear. Maybe now India will buckle down for a draw? Nope. Pant was joined by the hero of the first innings, Washington Sundar, and both decided to go for it. They brought out all the shots, the pull, the hook, the reverse sweeps. Pant and Sundar added 53 runs in just over 9 overs, bringing India all the way close to an improbable win. The Gabbatoir was about to be conquered, but there was another twist remaining. Sundar was bowled by Lyon, attempting a reverse sweep. His 22 came off just 29 balls, and he had brought India ever so close. But at the time of his dismissal, India still needed 10 runs. The next over, Shardul Thakur got out too. Between the two dismissals, Pant had dragged India even closer to victory. Only 3 runs needed now of the remaining 20 balls. The last ball of the 97th over of the Indian innings had Pant facing Hazelwood. He needed to be on strike for the next over because Cummins from the other side would have surely come in, and he had already taken 4 wickets, so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that he could take the other 3 too. Instead, Pant just drove the full ball down to the boundary. India had done it! India had conquered the Gabbatoir! Not only that, India had sealed the Border Gavaskar Trophy 2-1. Pant's unbeaten 89 of just 138 balls powered India to one of the most famous test wins on the Australian soil, or maybe on the foreign soil. Not only had India beaten Australia for only the second time in history, they had also done it in back-to-back series. But this Test series win was all the sweeter because of in what circumstances it happened. The captain goes home after the first test in which India were blown away for 36. Then throughout the series, they keep losing their premier bowlers to the point that they are playing the final test with 5 bowlers who had a combined experience of 4 tests and a total of 13 wickets before this test. Combine all of this with the pandemic restrictions. It felt nothing short of surreal. And to do it all at the Gabba of all places, the famous Gabbatoir, where Australia hadn't lost a test in 32 years. It resembled a dream sequence, a feeling like no other. Who else but Rishabh Pant was named the man of the match for his heroics on the final day. This was very much a series of bowlers though. Pat Cummins was named the man of the series for taking 21 wickets at an average of 20.04. For India, Siraj picked the most wicket, 13 at an average of 29.53. In batting, Manas Labuschagne top scored the series with 426 runs at an average of 53.25. For India, Rishabh Pant top scored with 274 runs at an average of 68.5. The Test series will forever be immortalized in the annals of cricket. Such was the magnitude of this win. And this time, Australia couldn't even say that they did not have their best batsman. Instead, India could certainly say they had neither their best batsmen nor their best bowlers, and somehow they still did the unthinkable. Since then, both teams have gone through further changes and, as of now, are in middle of another Border Gavaskar trophy on the Australian shores, but it's a story for another time. This does bring an end to our 3-part India Tour of Australia series. Do let us know what other topics you'd like to see on this channel. Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more content like this. This is Cricket Archives.